Welcome again to the Northview Church podcast. My name is Zach Matchett. I get to serve here as one of the pastors on staff. This is the podcast where we connect people with God and people with people. And we've had the huge privilege of hosting the Orange Conference the last couple of days here. And Orange is a nationally known ministry organization that works with tons of families and churches and kids and students, nonprofits, anybody that has anything to do with families and kids and students. And so I am super pumped today. We've had a lot of great speakers. I'm joined by an awesome guy, DanScott. What's up, Dan?
Hey, how's it going?
Good to see you, Dan. I want to hear about you because we, as kindred spirits, we both work with preteens.
Yes.
So this is the episode. If you're a family member, a grandparent of, a parent of, a preteen, we are going to try to dive into the world hard to define as the preteen world. And so why don't we start with this, Dan? Kind of tell me about your journey through what you've done in terms of working with students, and then what you're currently doing with Orange.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I've been a camp director. I've been a teacher. I've been a children's pastor, and all these different things. I love research and learning, and that really, we're talking about preteens. That's honestly what started me. I wanted to solve a problem. How can we help preteens win? And I came on staff at Orange in 2011, right out of the church. So I was a children's pastor, and then, came down to Orange, and I currently lead the creative team that does the weekend experience for our elementary and preteen curriculum.
So you're really essentially resourcing and equipping churches to kind of dial in with this age group.
Yeah.
So I want to define, we're going to talk about preteens today. I don't know if we want to talk about when we were preteens. It might be the last episode you want to hear. But I do think, and this is going to be news to you, there is a unique phase. I mean, we talk a lot about phases of kids and students, and there's these uniqueness to all of them. There is a switch that happens from that kid to preteen age group, and I'd love for you to maybe articulate what happens.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you, what that change is, and maybe how do you approach it, how churches and families can attack that?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so, man, what's tricky about anything related to phase and child development is anything that's researched and talked about is a stereotype. So our kids are going to do this at their own pace. And, so for one, it might be a 9-year-old who's acting like a preteen, and for others, it may not be until they're 12. And you may have some boys, they're still acting like preteens. When
it just keeps going.
It just keeps going. And you're like, when are they going to be out of this? But really, I mean, a lot of it is what's happening is neurological. It's stuff that's happening in their brain. And what's happening in their brain is affecting the way they're translating the world around them. And so, a lot of what's happening, a lot of people say, preteens are losing their minds, and they actually are. It's scientifically proven that they are. It's called cognitive pruning. And so basically the brain is getting ready for adulthood, and they're, many of them are entering or have entered puberty already. And so their brain really is just soaking in everything it will need to be a successful adult. And so really it's like, if you want your kids to learn anything about anything, like teach it to them when they're preteens and really reinforce that, because that is when the brain is making the most connections.
Probably, I would say, one of, if not the most formative time cognitively.
Absolutely.
In the lifespan of a human being.
Absolutely. Like there's two major time periods. The one is like 2 years old, 3 years old. That's why they're the terrible twos. Like you take a picture of a 3-year-old brain and an 11-year-old brain, and they almost look identical.
That's
like it's
insane.
Really scary, except the 11-year-olds can talk back to you. So it's like, it's a whole different level. But there is,
That's hilarious. Yeah. I think about, you need to think about, we're both parents.
Yes.
I mean, first 2 years, it's funny. I call it baby puberty. It's like one day you wake up one morning, you get your son or daughter out of the crib, or granddaughter, grandson out of the crib, and it's like, where did those teeth come from? And like, what happened to you? Now you're like this little human and not a kid. And so
then all of a sudden they're walking, and all of a sudden it's
my God,
all this change.
And it's just super
But then
fast.
It evens out. It's why everyone loves third graders, because they're just, they're like super cool, but they're super chill, and they're just having fun. And and they, turn 11.
They turn into preteens.
They do.
I think the manifestations of preteens, maybe you could speak to this a little bit. I would say moving from more of that concrete thinking to abstract thinking. That's one change. I've heard it said that they've kind of they have the ability, they just don't know they have it. Like that idea of like third person thinking, meaning they
can think about their thinking.
That's right. And they can see, it's like seeing yourself through the perspective of somebody else.
Yes.
And so this question of
empathy and emotional intelligence is huge.
That ramps up.
Yes.
Yeah. Because it's like now I start to make decisions based on how I think I may be perceived once I make this decision.
Yes. And their brain, though, isn't formed enough to always make the wisest choice with regards to that. Because they may say, I'm going to do this thing. I know it's wrong, but my reputation with that group of kids is more important than that.
That's right.
And
so
that's
I've got this.
Yeah. So I'm good. No, I'm good because they're going to like me at the end, as opposed to like, I will end up in suspension. You know, like they're not necessarily. I mean, they're not necessarily connecting all of those dots.
That's hilarious.
And you know, one of the things to keep in mind too is they're moving from this concrete thinking to abstract thinking. I'm glad you brought that up. It's not consistent. So it's not like all of a sudden I'm this abstract thinker that can have all of these great conversations. One day, you know, you'll be riding in the car with your preteen and you're like, oh man, I just had this amazing, like it was just this moment and it was so good. And we were asking each other's questions and we felt so good. And the next day it's like crickets, like you can't get anything but yes or no answers. And you know, we just have to understand that they're just not doing any of this consistently. And really they're practicing how to be an adult. And so they're not always going to get it right. But what the preteens allow for parents and kids is a safe place to land. That when not so much is at stake during those high school years, and when you make those mistakes, there's much more permanent effect. The middle school years, the preteen years, it's just a safe environment for them to try and fail and land, and we'll hug them and we'll pick them up and we'll move on.
Yeah, I think about the hard lefts.
Yeah.
It's just, I remember I went with a student. I took this young guy through 10 weeks. We met 10 weeks in a row.
Yeah.
It was kind of come from a difficult family situation, and the stepdad reached out to me and said, I really feel like it'd be good for you guys to spend some time together. So that was really like almost like it was an awesome experience because he's an awesome young man, but it was kind of a case study of like how the brain works. So I remember we would get together and we were reading through some passages from the New Testament and the Gospels and looking through the life of Jesus. And, at some level it was like, we would talk about it for a few minutes, and then it was just like, "Hey, what's your flavor of Gatorade?" And then it was like, "Oh my gosh, Steph Curry's way better than LeBron James," and we're like, and all of a sudden we're just going at this.
Yeah.
And like by week 4 or 5, at some point, we were reading a passage of scripture from the New Testament, and he says to me, he's like, "What if whoever wrote this made this all up?"
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, time out. I'm still on like Glacier Cherry is my favorite flavor, like all this other stuff. But it was such a hard left. And I think to your point about the process, as he was processing information about scripture, matters of faith, eventually he got there. And I think I realized that day I probably would not have gotten there if I wouldn't have had 4 weeks of
talking about nothing.
Steph Curry and
because it's relational equity for those moments when it comes into those heavier questions. And what's so important about those questions, because they will come, how we handle them really matters.
Oh my gosh.
The fact that you just say, like, you don't freak out on the other end of that question.
I didn't look cross-eyed at him.
You don't like jaw drop, like, what are you asking?
Yeah.
Because every time they ask a question, it's a test of your trust, and is this a safe place for me to ask these really tough questions that I'm wrestling with?
Yeah, and we both worked in the local church, and I feel like pretty confident saying that you'll agree with this. Yeah. I want our church to be the safest 100%. Place to process these questions and
your family, as a result of that.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So let's think about. So I'm sure people that are listening, and let's say they're a parent of a preteen. None of the clothes fit. They just bought shoes yesterday. They don't fit anymore. Like all this crazy stuff, and they're ending elementary school. Maybe they're starting middle school. Here in our area where we're filming, we have intermediate schools where 5th and 6th grade students are by themselves in a certain building in some school system. So there's a lot of unique expressions of that. But let's just kind of tailor it to them. Like, parenting's tough stuff. That's no joke. But what are some things that you have said or would say to a family who's raising a preteen? What are some unique needs that they have that families can help support them with? Yeah, absolutely. I think for at least this is what I experienced as a parent of preteens. Is there? Because how many kids do you have, Dan? We have 4, and 3 of them are out of the preteen phase, and one is
like smack dab in the middle of the preteen phase. But one of the, and I'm really bad at this. So I'm talking to myself. The amount of patience that a parent needs in during the preteen years, it's sort of exponential, because you will have so many times where you're like, what are you doing? Like, you know better than this. Like, I know that you know better than this. I've seen you make wiser choices, and you just like want to like shake them and go crazy, but they just need so much grace during this time, because what's happening is we forget that so much of our identity, who we are as adults, is formed during these years.
Yeah.
Like, if I look at my own life, much of what I care about now as a 40-something, I cared about as a 10-year-old and an 11-year-old. And we need to be patient with them as they're really trying on personalities and seeing, who am I really? Am I this person that I'm presenting at school? Am I this person that I'm presenting at home? Am I somewhere in between? Who is this person? And we just need to have all the grace and all the patience with our kids as they try these things. Also remember, hairstyles can grow back. Clothing styles will go out of style. Mm-hmm. And so pick your battles that you are like, I'm not going to care about hair. I get it. Like, you want to go blue this week. Okay, we'll do it semi-permanent because you're not going to want it next week. Yeah. But we'll try that. We'll give you a blue streak. Sure, let's try that. Yeah. We're going to let you wear that, as long as it's not inappropriate, like pick your battles, right? Like, the battles that matter during this phase are, how am I treating the people around me? How do my actions, this is where the empathy and the emotional intelligence, what is life like on the other side of me? I think those are the battles where I'm going to speak closer. I'm going to lean in closer with my kids and say, hey, when you say that in that way, this is how it comes across. And this is, I would just say, I know you're frustrated, but let's figure out a way that we can talk about that frustration in a way that's not as, mean or whatever, sure. Cause they're navigating relationships on a completely different level. So, there's a lot of things there, but so patience, grace,
choosing what battles to
choosing
fight.
what battles to fight. Yeah. Those are really,
that's good.
Those are really important.
And it's practical too. I think that could take a lot of different shapes and forms. Yeah. I feel like, and I feel this way too, in interacting with a lot of the families that we work with here at Northview. The challenge of being a parent can be pretty overwhelming. I mean, on the one hand, I think a lot of people feel the weight in a healthy way of, we want to be the spiritual leaders in our home. We want to do the best that we can to help our kids grow. So maybe we take it a step further and say, what would you say to a family that's like, how do I engage my preteen in discussion of spiritual things, matters of faith, the age-old question of, what did you learn at church today on the way home in the core? Like, well, how do you do that?
It's a lot of asking questions. And a lot of, and even the way you pose the question. So instead of like, what did you learn today? It's more, what questions did you ask today about what you were learning? Yeah. Get them thinking about it in a completely different way, so you don't get that verbatim answer. And we also, especially when it comes to spiritual things, I think we feel this urgency to pass on everything that we know about Christ or everything we know about whatever, and the truth is we have to remember that they're preteens, they have a limited attention span, and they have limited motivation to care. Right. And so we have to realize that each conversation is not hopefully the last conversation, but we're building this up and understand that their expression of faith may not look like our expression of faith, and it doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just means it's different. Yeah. Because they are Gen Z growing up in 2019, and the way they will express faith will be different than myself, who grew up in the 90s and all of that. Sure. So it's just, it's those sort of things when we look at, okay, do they love God? Do they have a relationship with Jesus? Do they love their neighbor? Okay, good. Okay, great. Yeah. And they may not want to go to our church anymore. Okay. So how do we help them get connected to a faith community where they do connect.
Yeah.
You know, especially like you guys, you have a great preteen ministry.
Yeah.
You know, and you could have lots of preteens shift their families over here. And, you know, you as a family have to be willing to like kind of work with that and say, hey, our most important thing right now is you connecting with faith. We can do that in lots of different places.
Absolutely. Well, and I think too, we would say preteen ministry is almost the onboarding for developing community and being a small group. Like it's almost, because
it takes it to another level.
You know this, right? I mean, you know this. When you get kids in a group, I would say that the external processing of what they believe is in some ways just as important as like getting it right the first time. And like they've got to have a safe place to talk about it. And so what I find, and I'm going to, you wrote a great book called Caught in Between, and I remember there's a quote in there that says, children's ministry, I'm paraphrasing, children's ministry is kind of built around statements. Yes. Preteen ministry is built around questions.
Yes, for sure.
And so for us, the context for us in preteen ministry at all of our locations is the small group time after the message starts the exact same way every time, which is what was the THP, take home point. Yeah. So what was the main point? What did you learn at church today? To say this in the car, kind of thing. To say that, why was it important? Yeah. So it's not just I memorized it. Now there's a rationale, who cares thing to it. Absolutely. And then the last question of the small group time is, how will this help me to live differently this week? Yeah. Because I think at this point they may not know they can do it. Yes. But we prime the pump and you say, okay, now how will this play out in how you live your life? And that does move into the abstract.
Yeah, absolutely.
It has to.
Yeah, and that's that relevant piece, right? Like that's that connecting the information to the matter at hand, where you as the parent, you can help them see where that connects, because they won't always see that on their own, because it is more abstract. But, you know, I love the small group community. One of the things that this was probably advice for preteen parents as well. Make sure your kids are going regularly, you know, prioritize it.
Absolutely.
Because
community is king.
Yeah. And there is a point, and I've seen it in my own family, where it shifts. My influence shifts. It's not that I don't have influence, but they are going to ask their small group leaders questions that they may not want to ask us. And I need to make sure that as a parent that I've created that circle around them, that team around them, and part of that is how they connect with their leader at church.
Yeah. I think once kids get into the elementary, preteen years and moving forward, the circle needs to widen in terms of influences. I would love, I mean, this might be pie in the sky. If every kid in preteen that we worked with and the churches that you help resource and equip, if they had like 5 meaningful adult connections. Absolutely. School teacher, coach, small group leader, student pastor, kids pastor, like that beyond their family of origin or whoever's raising them, like that circle needs to widen. So we can wrap up with a couple questions here, rapid fire. One is oftentimes we say this statement here at Northview, and I think this applies to any youth organization that's working with kids and preteens, is when families win, we win. We meaning the church. The tendency though is, because we've got degrees, we went to school, we're the professional youth workers, is that it's easy to set ourselves up to win, to set up the youth organization or this youth center or church to win. So how do we set families up to win, leading spiritually in their home, and maybe have the unique focus on for a preteen?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the big thing to realize is we need to connect with parents that make sense to their everyday world, that, you know, and to help the parent realize they don't have to do everything that we might offer them as a church. That if you have multiple kids and they are all involved in different activities, your home is Grand Central Station. Like it's crazy, right? But if you can have 2 meals together that week, and you can have meaningful dialogue where your phones are put away,
sacred time,
and you are there, and you've said, okay, for this next 20 minutes, even we're just going to focus on us and having a conversation. That is a step towards being intentional in the way that you parent. The other thing is, like, man, parents, just you take advantage of what your church does have to offer. You know, if there is an event, you know, prioritize it. And if you can't get there, figure out a way for someone to film it and stream it and, you know, make it available online. And, you know, because we can leverage technology to really connect with each other.
Sure. Yeah, and I hope that we're leveraging stuff that we're talking about that. And that's part of the reason. It's funny you said that. That's part of the reason why we're really trying to get this content out for parents, because we know that in the trenches, in the day in and day out, this is difficult stuff. And so one last question is, because you said you've been through the preteen stage and now you are returning to it. I want to make it just kind of on the ground. Like, how is the Scott family navigating what's been a breakthrough maybe that you've seen during that preteen phase? Yeah,
for us, it really is, who are the adults in our kids' lives? Who are the other adults in our kids' lives? Whether that has been, our middle schooler actually goes to a youth group at a different church because she connects there. Yeah. And we've said, you know what? What's most important is you connecting with God and with a faith community. And if that's not at our home church, I'm going to be okay with that, because, I'm in contact. We know them. Like, it's a great church, that whole thing. What else? Even like extracurriculars, right? Like, if you're like, for my daughter who's really into music, like, we basically auditioned the people that would be in her life, that aren't just teaching her about music, but are also teaching her about leading worship and, cool. that sort of thing. So don't just default to what you think you should default, but each relationship that you can help navigate in your kids' lives, the ones that you have the ability to, man, absolutely. That has been great for us.
That's great advice. Well, how can people get in touch with the work that you're doing in Orange? Maybe even share specifically about the book, Caught in Between.
Yep. Yeah. So Caught in Between, the first half is actually anyone who has a preteen in their house or in a small group, it'd be great for them. Yeah. It's on Amazon. It's easy to find that way. Just Caught in Between, DanScott. I have a website. This is DanScott.com. Okay. And I have a lot of stuff on there.
You're on social media.
Yeah, I'm on social media. DanScott77 is pretty much everywhere.
Okay, so, there you go. All right, right on. Sounds good. Yeah. Well, we've been, again, super thankful for all the work that Orange is doing. And if you're listening and you might be the parent of, grandparent of, guardian of a preteen, and you're thinking through, like, how do we make sense of this? How do we get through this unique phase? I hope our conversation has been helpful. And again, you can check out all these episodes of our podcast on Spotify. You can also subscribe on Apple Podcasts or iTunes. You go to Google Play, on our website, northviewchurch.us. If you go to the resources tab, you can find our podcast linked there. And our hope is that this would just simply be a blessing. This conversation would be an encouragement to stick with it, hang in there.
Absolutely.
And so, Dan, thanks again for hanging out with us.
You're welcome. Thanks.
All right, awesome. We'll see you next time.